Good morning or afternoon, depending on where you are in the world. I'm Jim Rosapep, the chair of Alianta, and want to welcome everybody today to our economics webinar, catching up on what's going on with the economy, business environment, challenges, opportunities in Romania, and Romania in relation to its region and Europe, and obviously to the United States as well. We're going to start in a couple of minutes. We have some great guests. This is being recorded, so keep that in mind. You're going to be there for posterity. For questions, if you would put them in the chat, they'll be shared with everybody. And then Raluca Bakur, who is our communications director, who is managing this, will take questions a little later in the program, and we'll read them, and our guests will address them. And then if there are folks who want to do follow-up questions, we'll have a chance to do that as well. We're going to open up with some initial questions that I'm going to ask, and then we're going to open it up to everybody. Let's just give one more minute for everybody to get in, and then we will get started. Thank you very much for joining us today. As I think most people on this call know, Alianta is the American NGO of individuals, professionals, firms, organizations that care about the Romanian-American relationship and the Romanian-American alliance. We also have an affiliate in Romania called Romanian Friends of Alianta for Romanians and folks there who care about the alliance as well and work together. And I'm sure people from both groups are with us today, and there's a great deal of expertise on this webinar today. And so everyone gets an opportunity to contribute to all of our knowledge, education, and insight. Let me start by introducing our three panelists. First, Professor Liviu Vonia is Romania's representative of the International Monetary Fund. He's senior advisor to the executive director and a member of the executive board of the IMF. He was deputy governor of the National Bank of Romania for 5 years, budget minister in the Romanian government for 2 years, deputy finance minister for another year. And he recently published a book that everyone's going to want to go out and order, a comprehensive look at the Romanian economy entitled 100 Years of Honesty, Recovering the Lost Memory of the Romanian Economy, 1918 to 2018. And it's available on Amazon. Next is Mark Davis, who is the regional director of EBRD for Romania and Bulgaria, the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development. His experience includes work as an economist at the World Bank, a country coverage officer for finance and derivative teams for Morgan Stanley and Goldman Sachs, and advisor to the vice president of banking at EBRD. He started working in his job in Bucharest in April of 2019. And last but not least, Marius Dan, Senior Vice President for Corporate Strategy at Franklin Templeton Investments, member of the Management Oversight Committee and the investment team at Fondul Proprietatea, the $2.5 billion Romanian fund that's listed in London and in Bucharest. Marius is also a member of the Templeton Private Equity Partners team, the Franklin Templeton focused on emerging market private equity investments. Before joining Franklin Templeton, he was anchor of several capital markets focused programs at the Money Channel, Romania's business television network. Thanks to all for joining today. Let me start, and I want to ask Professor Vonia to start off, but then ask each of our guests to address it. How's the Romanian economy doing in the context of the international pandemic?
Well, thank you for inviting me, and thank you for the challenging question, because it's hard to say it in a few words. I stick by the IMF forecast for Romania, which is -5 GDP this year and -9 budget deficit for this year. But the real challenge is regards the next 2 years, I would say. However, coming into this crisis, I would say 3 things. First, Romania was better prepared than it was in 2009. Far better prepared in terms of lower twin deficits. Current account, for example, was 3 times lower. Financing gap was easier to finance, so with better access to international markets and longer maturities. And financial stability was sound in terms of low NPL rate. Second, relative to its peers and also relative to the larger category of emerging markets, Romania had a comparative advantage prior to this crisis of a really low public debt to GDP. which means that there was room to increase. But of course, this room is going to to fill up quite fast. Also, prior to this crisis, we were enjoying the highest, or let's say the longest growth period in our recent history, also at highest average rates. And even in 2017, as early as in 2017, everything that was lost in terms of personal wealth in the previous crisis was fully recovered. So basically, Romania was in a better financial position also as a country and also at individual level. However, and this is my last point, vulnerabilities have been building up, especially in the last 3 years prior to this crisis. Mainly, they refer to the fiscal side, and the main vulnerability was financing permanent expenditures, like increase in some social spendings, by using extraordinary revenues, which are just higher revenues due to higher economic growth. So overall, a lower structural level of revenues. And also the other vulnerability related to, let's say, unfinished reforms, unfinished structural reforms. But overall, as I say, the situation was better than in the previous crisis. This year, it's relatively manageable, despite of course, bleak forecast for all countries in the region. The discussion should be regarding the years to come, but we'll have time to discuss it, I hope, later on.
We definitely will. Let me ask one brief follow-up question, then I'm going to go to Dan. Is Romania doing about average compared to the other countries in Europe, or better or worse, would you say?
Prior to the crisis, it was doing better on average, and now it's not doing worse. For example, in June, IMF revised the forecast downwards for the majority of European countries, but not for Romania.
Gotcha. Okay, thank you. Dan, what's your perspective?
Hi everyone, and thanks for the invite to join this panel. I would echo Liviu's comments, and what we focus on is also the state of the capital market, as well as the larger companies in Romania, especially the state-owned companies, of which we are a significant minority shareholder of. And what's very encouraging to see is that the capital structure, the health of these companies is far better than it was 12 years ago when we had the global financial crisis. So, as Liviu referenced, the deficits and the debt to GDP, we look at a lot of these large companies, and they've come a really long way to go from a significant net debt position to a net cash position, which really gives them a strong buffer current environment, to make investments, to make acquisitions, to distribute dividends to the government, and to us as a shareholder as well in these companies. So that makes us quite optimistic as for the outlook for the next couple of years. Where we really want to see progress is in terms of bringing more companies to the market. We think that's a tremendous opportunity for the Romanian government to do so, to list companies like Hydroelectrica, the Bucharest Airport, the Constanța Port, and a few other large companies, because in the current environment, it could really bolster the capital market, the development of the local capital market in Romania, as well as attract additional funding in order to finance the much needed infrastructure investments, which could really give a significant boost to the economic recovery in the next couple of years.
Thank you. And now, Mark, you all are direct investors and lenders active in the market. How do you see the economy right now and the effect of the crisis?
Well, I think, this is a crisis that's unprecedented and uncertain. So I think that's the main thing we all have to face. I mean, early on in this thing, we knew it was both a supply and demand shock. We didn't know how it was going to work its way through the economy. And frankly, we didn't know how orderly things would be. It's been very orderly, frankly, globally and in Romania. But that's been a president of extensive fiscal monetary policy expansion globally and in Romania. So how this thing continues is really quite unclear. But what we see among our clients is they're doing fairly well. We put together a solidarity package at EBRD to provide quick support, lending facilities, working capital facilities to our clients, and business is up. We've certainly we've reached out to our clients, and we have an outsized amount of business this year supporting them. But the impact of this hasn't been that severe. So we haven't seen NPLs going up in our portfolio. We haven't seen kind of the kind of stress you would expect around a quote unquote crisis. We have to see what's coming. I think we're very interested in how this, whether it's VW or a longer crisis, and how that affects our clients and potential pipeline. But I think what's important is to understand how Romania is going to position itself in the global supply chain post-COVID. That to me is very interesting. And many of our clients are FDI investments into, for example, precision metallurgy works in the auto and aerospace, for example. Very, very strong sponsors. Nevertheless, we're out there providing liquidity facilities for them. Because they're, we see multinationals looking for all opportunities to support themselves, given what potentially is coming. And I think there's a big question mark. I don't think any of us have an answer for that. I think, we've been receptive to the actions taken by the government. We can talk about some of those, and also to this long-term post-recovery strategy, which is focused on productivity and production in global supply chains, as opposed to consumption in global supply chains, which has been a bit of the nature of the economy over the last few years, and that's been reflected by an increase in the current account deficit. So, it's a very interesting time to watch this develop, but I can't say we have a strong view on how things are going to go. And I just Liviu's and the IMF's forecast is similar to ours. These things continue to get updated. We looked across the different IFIs. We're all sort of in the same ballpark, and I think there's a relative amount of uncertainty amongst us, and too, as to how accurate those forecasts will be as the data comes in and as the situation evolves.
Thank you. Lots to chew on and lots to follow up on. I'd like to dig a little deeper in terms of, and anybody please address this, which areas of the Romanian economy are in the most distress currently, that haven't opened up, that are in the most trouble? Who would like to take that?
Well, I can try to start an answer, because
Please.
it's not a definitive answer. Maybe you saw today the news on industrial production being down 16%. Year on year after 6 months. So that's clearly a sign of the immediate impact on the supply. While consumption was another recent indicator, was basically quasi-stagnant for the first 6 months. So my reading, which is not only for Romania, I think this is a general feature of this crisis, which is IMF, for example, and the other IFIs do label it as both a supply and demand shock, simultaneous supply and demand shock. In the academic world and in the markets and so on, it's probably mostly seen as supply shock. But I would say that it was an instant supply shock. That's just my personal opinion. But while supply can recover maybe faster, the impact on demand, although it will be initially slower, it will definitely be longer lasting. It will last much longer. So I think the real problem will be the absence of this main driver of growth for the last 6 years, which was demand. In the case of the Romanian economy, and there are not really other alternative growth engines which are readily available. Just like we are changing engines, so from tomorrow it's something else. It's not so easy. The good thing, if you want, is that the external shock does not have the same negative impact as in many other emerging countries, precisely because our current account deficit was widening prior to the crisis. So basically, it's an opportunity to some extent to limit the current account deficit. Basically, also the forecast is that it will not increase. So the negative contribution of net exports to grow will not go up, but unfortunately, demand will not have the same positive contribution to growth.
I understand.
But so my reading is that of course you could say that services, as everywhere in the world, are very much affected and so on. But the fact is that in the Romanian economy, not all the services are on the, let's say, or let's put it, some of the services operate in the underground economy. So not all are fiscalized. Not all are producing tax revenues anyway. So there is an impact for the informal workers, but not necessarily an impact for the budget immediately. But the longer impact will come from the demand side. This is my view. Yeah.
Thank you. Mark or Marius, do you have any comments on the parts of the economy you see hit the most?
Yeah, I'd like to jump in on that. I totally agree with what Liviu was saying. Clearly, the SME sector is, it's the obvious answer, is hit hard by this, but there's a context to that. The SMEs tend to have negative equity in Romania, and there are not enough of them doing well. There are not enough of them that are bankable, which is part of the reason that the financial sector coverage of the companies in Romania is relatively low. This isn't going to help that at all. And then the other piece here is that in order to consume, you have to have disposable income, and there's only so much that can be done on the fiscal side for a certain period of time. There has to be. So I think it's not only the demand coming from the way people look at consumption, but it's also demand coming from the way they're receiving income. They're having a hit now to their disposable income. It's being supported by fiscal policy, but the fiscal policy itself has to get back into a place that's sustainable over the longer term. Debt to GDP ratio of 35, which will be going up significantly, closer to 45% by the end of the year. That has to, that's okay on the debt to GDP ratio, but there's a debt target as well, and some adjustment now is acceptable within the EU. But how does this go forward over the longer term? And then how do the rating agencies look at it, et cetera, et cetera? So there has to be some fiscal consolidation that comes through, and that's going to put pressure on everybody, because right now, they're receiving some of that disposable income in the form of subsidies.
Thank you, Marius. Do you have any comments on that?
We're shareholders in a lot of the energy companies, and I think the overall comment is all the sectors have pretty much been hit. Some less than others, and I think the energy sector is one which has been relatively protected. And on the other spectrum, we have, airports. We're a shareholder of the Bucharest Airport, and at some point during the peak of the state of emergency and restrictions, we've seen traffic collapsing by 98% compared to what it was during the same time last year. Now, part of that is coming back up as the countries open up and travel has been allowed. But it's going to be a longer recovery. What's actually good to see is that from a valuation perspective, we're not seeing the same type of impact. So we are seeing on a lot of these companies an expansion of the multiples that investors are willing to pay. As EBITDA is collapsing, the valuations of the companies are down, but they're not down as much. And as EBITDA will start increasing from this low point, we expect that multiple to come back down. But of course, on the another sector that's been hit is the airline sector. And here, the government intervention is critical for TAROM and Blue Air and the hospitality sector. There's no question about it. But as Liviu said, you don't necessarily see a significant portion of that and impacting the budget as well. On the fiscal side, of course, one point to make is that we have a growing private pension fund system in Romania. We have $2 billion of net inflows in this private pension funds. A lot of it goes to bond investments, and so about 80% of that, so $1.6 billion, is attracted by the government to finance the deficit, whereas the other portion goes into the equity market in Romania, and that contributes to maintaining this positive evolution that we've seen in the last few months.
If I may add on
Please,
something that Mark said, and he's absolutely right. On debt, as I said, getting into this crisis, debt was low, relatively low. But then next year it will probably get very close to the 43-45% threshold, which was calculated by the National Bank some years ago as a threshold above which the probability of a recession exceeds 50%. So this means that if debt gets to that level, and it's likely to do so in view of the higher deficit, and if it stays there, or if it consolidates at that level, then a recession could be, could take a longer time to, let's say, the recovery could take a longer time. It will take a longer time to recover. This relates to a question that I can see it on the chat, on the projected level of stimulus on gross and relative basis relative to other Central European countries. It relates because indeed we have a relatively narrow fiscal space, and this will not get larger next year. What is still available is a monetary policy could still provide stimulus, because let's say the monetary policy has not shot yet the silver bullet, and that could be a very useful. I mean, the policy mix could rely also on the monetary policy rather than on fiscal policy in the years to come.
Thank you. In the United States, we've seen some industries do well. Telemedicine, online education, online shopping. I mean, people are, Amazon in particular, but many companies are like hiring people, well, laying them off. Are there some sectors of the Romanian economy that have benefited during the crisis? And how do you see that? Is it similar to what's going on in the United States, particularly in everything online? People make money online, they're making money, or is it somewhat different?
Maybe I can Well, we've definitely seen increased business on the. It's very similar. I mean, it's what you would expect. We've seen the local similar companies to Amazon. The online sales certainly have gone up. Their businesses are growing faster than they were last year, but they were already growing relatively fast. We've seen software companies, tech space continues right along, really without a hitch. Everyone's very busy, and that's kind of the extent of it, right? I mean, I don't think there's been a broader boost in demand that we kind of see in the U.S., where there's a lot of sectors that are just cranking along. I think it's a slightly different nature in Romania. I mean, the lockdown was a full-on lockdown for quite a long time, and it was an orderly one where people followed the rules, and that really shut things down. So there was a real hit to activity overall, and then it starts to open up and things get back moving. And people go back to work, factories open, etc. But when you're in a global supply chain, in the airline industry, for example, or in the car industry, these things, there is an impact. So I'm not seeing a lot of vibrant sectors that have benefited from the lockdown. Online education coming out of Romania is not the area where now there are a lot of opportunities created by this, and I think there's a lot of smart minds thinking about how to take advantage of it. And I also think, and we may get into this later in the call, but I think there's a huge opportunity for equity investment around the hardship, the economic hardship, the impact on the company's balance sheets, et cetera, the need for equity injection at some point along the line of this curve, and the opportunity to invest in the smart areas that can take advantage of the changing marketplace that we're going to see post-COVID.
That's a great transition, maybe for all panelists. And then I do want to open it up to all the questions we have on the chat room. Can you see now, and it's really early and we're still in the crisis, we're not in the post-crisis phase yet, permanent changes in the makeup of the Romanian economy or Romania's economic relationship with the supply chains, with its relationships in Europe, with its relationships in Asia, relations with the United States? You see some more permanent changes coming out of the crisis that people should be looking at?
Well,
maybe not. Any thoughts on that?
I'll take this one. I think from a supply chain perspective, we're seeing Romania tied very closely. Romania is a supplier to a lot of the European car manufacturers. I mean, that is the biggest export of the country overall. And of course, the slowdown that we're seeing in global demand in the auto sector will have an impact on what's going on the activity in the country, and will force a lot of the European countries as well to rethink their supply chains globally to have a lesser dependence on China. The United States has been looking at this for the last few years, and I think this pandemic will speed up policy and business thinking towards less dependence on China from that perspective.
That presumably would be good for Romania, unless I'm missing something.
It should be. Because at the end of the day, Romania is still, labor in Romania is still extremely cheap on a relative basis compared to the other EU countries. Wages have there's been a lot of wage pressure in the last few years, but there's still a long way to go. There's nothing to be proud of, but it is an opportunity for those global players looking at FDIs in a country like Romania.
Can I jump in? Yeah, can I jump in there?
Please.
I totally agree. I should have mentioned, by the way, logistics. We've seen big demand for logistics. The tech sector. The future of work and the future of the location of work. So Romania is an interesting country in that the secondary cities are significant. They're already vibrant. They have good revenues. They're able to invest in infrastructure. They're a little bit outside of the national politics to a degree, which can kind of help in sustainability of focus on developing those cities. And COVID the way people work in the future work post-COVID makes those cities even more attractive in my view. So I think that's interesting. I also agree completely with Marius that the wage pressure that we've seen in Romania, the wage increase has been pretty significant, and Romania labor is almost getting to the point where it's pricing itself out of that advantage. Presumably the wage pressure will on a relative terms will slack a little bit. That may help Romania. I think it's a relative question. But I think it just puts an emphasis on a couple things. The business climate itself, this is a relative game. And, for Romania to increase its relative wealth in Europe, to go from 67% to 87% that they would like to do, in the next 10 years, then they need to attract FDI. They need to attract domestic investment and do that successfully. Business climate is crucial. Romania is perceived as a place with a tough business climate. Relatively, corruption is used around Romania in terms of EU, but it's actually a place where FDI has come in, been successful. It's a navigatable business climate, and there's a relative level of orderliness where you can actually do business successfully. And I think that's perceived. Without the wage pressure, it really is an opportunity. And I think, frankly, I've been surprised with the sort of. This is an interesting group because I didn't realize the U.S.-Romania connection was as strong as it is and important as it is to both countries. So that, to me, was very interesting. And I think, frankly, I have no view on any of this from a geopolitical point of view, but the supply chain China question is an opportunity for Romania, clearly. So, and I think as there's a reorientation of investment, Romania is going to clearly be one of those countries that could really attract in. But in order to do that, again, focus on the business climate. We have to get the infrastructure right. There's at least a 60 billion euro gap in transport infrastructure in this country. That has to be addressed, and it hasn't been addressed in past years. We've seen over and over changes of transport ministers, lack of the ability to implement these projects. We want to help with that. I also note there's 35 billion out of the EU 750 billion package coming to Romania in grants and in guarantees. Those can help fill that gap, but that work has to be done. Where we're successful investing in infrastructure is actually with municipalities where we have consistency in counterparts. So we need it at the national level, the ability to implement. I think it's extremely important. Sorry for the long.
No, thank you. Raluca, why don't we start taking some of the questions? We have a lot of them in the chat room.
Well, I think one of the first one from Larry. Thank you, Larry, for the question. I think Livio answered it partially. Just as a reminder, everybody is currently muted, so if you have questions, please send them in the chat so that we can relay them to the panelists. And I'm going to read a question from Cheng Turkmani, who is also on Alianta's board. Thank you for the question. And it's a question from Marius and Mark. Secretary Pompeo is visiting the Czech Republic, Slovenia, Austria, and Poland this week to discuss everything from civil nuclear cooperation to 3Cs initiatives. What are some of the projects in Romania for improving regional energy and infrastructure projects under the 3Cs initiative?
I can start with this one because we're shareholders of Petrom, we're shareholders of Nuclear Electrica, and one of the biggest projects in the country is the Neptune one in the Black Sea, and it's been stalling for the last 4 years, I would say, and it's for us as a shareholder, it's been extremely disappointing to see that there's no political alignment for a project that secures Romania's independence from Russia for the next 20 to 30 years. It's the way to maintain independence. It's very hard to understand why this project has been politicized to the extent that it has. And from where we're sitting right now, it looks like we have to go through the elections for the parliament to be reconfigured in order to have a decision, which means that we'll have clarity for the specific project probably at least 12 months down the road. And then the other big project for the energy sector in Romania is what happens to Nuclearelectrica's reactor 1 when it has to be refurbished. This timeline has been pushed back for a couple of years. Now the timeline is 2026, but that's a significant project for the company. We're talking about a company that has a market cap of $1 billion, and the refurbishment is estimated to cost about $1.2 billion at least. So these are two significant projects, and of course related to Neptune, there's the infrastructure to bring the gas from the Black Sea, bring it online, transport it to Europe. So that pipeline still needs to be built. We certainly hope that these projects will be moving along in the future, because they're critical for the Romanian energy sector.
Thank you. Mark or Liviu, did you want to add anything to that?
Just to support, if I can quickly just support, we're also an investor in Black Sea Oil and Gas, along with Carlyle, on the first site to start bringing some of that those proven reserves into the pipeline, and also building a pipeline, investing in Brua pipeline project, etc. So fully support what Marius was saying. Also want to note that the opportunity for renewables, things didn't work out very well under the green certificates in the past and the carbon pricing. There's a new start now. Recent regulations allowing for bilateral contracts, which frankly were abused, and one of the things that hit Hidroelectrica's balance sheet back in 2012, and prior to that was those bilateral contracts. I think we've gotten over that now. And the ability to sign up bilateral contract, long-term offtake agreements bilaterally between producers and consumers of electricity are important to get the renewables market going. While we're working on a contract for differences with the authorities, which is the new way to set up these markets over the longer term. So we see a huge opportunity in renewables in Romania, sort of starting now, and we're starting to see the demand for that. And then the last thing anyone needs to stress, I think in the energy sector, the opportunity, the SOEs played an extremely important role, and the corporate governance and management of those SMEs is crucial for success. Hidroelectrica pre-2012 and 2012 till today is a different management team, I think, I'm putting it bluntly. So, the opportunity to take Hidroelectrica the next step, we were ready to do, we signed a memorandum of understanding, ready to invest in a pre-IPO investment into Hidroelectrica to help them through that process and have our signal there. And that's extremely important. This is a company that has a global footprint in terms of its marketability as an investment, coming out of an IPO for Romania. It could put it on the map. But it's also an important investment opportunity to take advantage of renewables and other strategic opportunities for and within Romania, and we need to get that right. So it's about corporate governance, and that gets back to politics. So we'll leave that for now, but I think that's extremely important, and we're very keen to support the right intentions.
Thanks, Mark.
Let me just add about the Free Seas initiative. That was part of the question.
Yes.
Romania has a big stake in this. Has a big interest. It's also a co-founder of the Free Seas Initiative Fund, which is based in Luxembourg. And I was personally involved in promoting the Free Seas initiative and Romania's role in it in the US and within the IMF. And you will see IMF acting on this later this year, I hope. So Free Seas initiative is a very important project for Romania, and we trust that some cross-border projects can actually have a better let's say effect, have a better impact or a higher impact than individual smaller scale projects. So I think it's very important, and Romania will continue to promote it and to also to finance it, and also to be willing to host large investments, including from the US.
Thank you. And I need to correct myself because I didn't at the beginning when I introduced Livio give the disclaimer that the views he's expressing here are his own and not representing the IMF. They are equally valuable, but I wanted to be sure I did that. Raluca, what's our next question?
We only have two so far, but I want to encourage the participants. If you have a question that's too long, just message us so that the moderator can unmute you, and so you can ask the question directly. Oh, there we go. Corina has a question regarding the recovery package and economic stimulus. Corina Rubeja would appreciate our experts' opinion on the effectiveness of measures taken by the government so far. Also, what would they expect to see in the next few months? And again, if you have a question that's too long, just send a short message and we'll unmute you.
Who wants to take that up?
It's
okay,
tough because there's a lot of things that they've done, and it's a process, right? I mean, there are things that you can do over the short term, and I think they've been quite active. And the finance ministry has been all out to address this crisis, and I think and the central bank as well, manage this quite well. So there's a lot of different things. I think for example, the moratorium on NPLs, that actually helps banks, right? So, if you've got a short-term impact, it's not necessarily a long-term, and so you're an SME out there, you're having trouble paying your loan facility. The moratorium allows that not to go into a non-performing loan, and that doesn't hit capital of the bank. So, it was a very cooperative extension, in fact, of that moratorium that's helpful for everyone. So it's been, that kind of dialogue has been very orderly. Clearly, the labor support in terms of paying salaries, paying unemployment, keeping the income going and the economy going has been a support. But again, how long that can go. And then it gets into the post-recovery strategy, I think, is a very good one that was put out. I mean, it was just a good read. Really good intentions. The question is implementation, and it's really, really quite difficult. So, for example, the SME FNG SIM, so it's the State Guarantee Agency, is providing sovereign guaranteed support for banks to make loans to SMEs, and there's been a huge demand into that program, and the team has been working sort of around the clock to meet that demand. There have been complaints, etc. But, they've done an amazing job, frankly, to get that money out the door. Over the longer term, they can expand that program dramatically. And we're talking to them about ways to do that through a first loss structure, which has a telescopic impact. It makes the guarantee clear in terms of, so, there's technical details. But when you get into the technical details, it takes time to implement that. And it takes people's time when they're trying to do, sort of crisis fighting. It's the same thing with the infrastructure investment program. It's the same thing with industrial support. It's the same thing with, the sovereign wealth fund and a national development bank. All these things are major implementation tasks that are going to have to be done over a significant period of time. And the track record recently on sustained implementation in Romania because of the political cycle and the nature of the way the public administration, unfortunately, at the central level has been a little bit politicized, and therefore too many people changing positions too often to have sustainable impact. That's got to be dealt with. So that's sort of a post-election thing, but it's really important that we get the civil service back into its role as an unpoliticized implementation body, working with, including with the private sector, to implement some of the programs that are in that recovery strategy.
Are there any things that the government has tried during the crisis, again, on the economic front, either with labor or business or banks or landlords or real estate or anything, that they've tried that hasn't really worked that well? I mean, that's certainly true in the United States. We have some things that have worked and some things that haven't worked. Are there things that haven't quite worked as well as people were hoping?
Let me just, if I may say something related to this.
Sure.
And so I really want to make 3 points on this, which I think are relevant. First, that it's still very early. The crisis, it's still in its early stage. It's wishful thinking to discuss about recovery, but we are still very early in the crisis. And we don't know anything about second wave of pandemic, but even as it is, it's quite bad. And so before getting better, it might get worse. So it's still early on. Therefore, it's important to secure the financing needs for next year and so on. And this comes a second point, which is I think the tremendous role played by the National Bank through its decision to buy T-bills of the Romanian government on the secondary market, which was unprecedented and was very, very useful to basically to support the value of the T-bills. It was done by other countries in the region, but in Romania it was not done before, and I think it has been very useful. Finally, I think, rather than saying what hasn't worked well, because numbers don't lie, so eventually we'll see the impact of the measures taken and the measures not being taken in the numbers, in the economic figures. But there is a clear opportunity to use this crisis to undertake the long needed structural reforms, especially in the area of taxation, in terms of too many loopholes, that too many benefit from these loopholes, and also insolvency regimes. What Mark said, that many SMEs have negative equity, and actually they have it on perpetual. There is perpetual loss-making companies, quite a large number of them. So I think the exit barriers from the market should be, more attention should be paid to ease these exit barriers. On entry barriers, I think the business climate is favorable in terms of it's easy to enter the market. It's not so easy to exit the market, and this can pose competitiveness problems for the other participants in the market. So I think there are areas where more can be done in the near future.
We have a couple more questions from Cheng and Alan, and maybe I can give the opportunity to Alan to ask it directly, and then Cheng.
That'd be great.
And if you could unmute Alan and Cheng.
Alan, you should be unmuted.
There we go.
I read this morning in the news from Romania that there's an upcoming no confidence vote scheduled for the government. And then shortly after that, in late September, there are elections. And I'm wondering if either or both of these are going to cause disruption to the economy.
Good question. What are your views?
I can start here. I think the biggest issue will be with the implementation of some of the measures that the government has announced, which also Mark hinted to, because the politicians are now focused on the infighting and the upcoming no confidence vote. Otherwise, we're quite used to have a lot of political noise coming out of Romania, and the economy has performed quite well in the last few years. Now, the problem is that during a pandemic, when you have important economic measures that need to be implemented, you don't need this type of interference and infighting in the parliament. And one thing that will have a significant impact on the fiscal side, which we haven't talked about, is the planned increase in the pensions, because pensions are supposed to increase by 40% starting in September. Now, the government, of course, has announced that they cannot afford to do that. The problem is, what will the parliament push for? So that's, I think, the biggest question mark that a lot of us have, and it's quite unclear from where we're sitting right now as to what type of increase will go through starting in September.
Thank you. Cheng, you're unmuted now.
Oh, yes. Hi, everyone. Thank you. Thank you so much for your time this morning. I'm concerned about another industry in Romania, and that's that of agriculture. We talked, I think, this morning about energy and 3Cs initiative. Regarding agriculture, as you know, the harvest this year was terrible. And we have a significant decrease in the production in the agricultural sector. But I'm concerned also about food security and food storage. And perhaps because I have a personal interest in this industry, in that I have been working for many years now in building cold storage in Romania, supplying the cold storage needs for many of the hypermarkets that are active in Romania. And so I've been working very closely with the US Department of Agriculture in assisting the government of Romania regarding its need to have a proper cold chain. And I don't mean just in Bucharest or Ilfov, but rather in the county levels. It's a pity to see all those delicious fruits and vegetables going to waste, from apricots to peaches to berries and whatnot. And there's only so many jams you could make with these fruits. So finally, the government of Romania has put in its national strategic plan the need for this cold chain in Romania. So I guess my question was really for Mark Davis, and that is, do you have plans from the EBRD to be involved in financing or assisting the government of Romania with respect to this particular need on a national level?
Sure.
I'm building, but as a country as a whole, I think we see a great need. Thank you.
Look, my response to that is, and thanks very much. Actually, it's interesting. It's a general response. Look, that's a role for the private sector to fill. We're ready to invest in it. Show us the project. Show us the company that we can invest with. If it's financially viable, we'll be happy to do that. Now, there may be some things around it that, from a regulatory, and this applies to any sort of project of a similar nature, where you're filling a gap in sort of the supply chain or infrastructure. There may be some regulations and policy problems around it that we can address along the way. We love to do that. We do policy objectives that are specifically focused on things we invest around, because we want to execute success of those policy changes. So, that sounds very interesting. That's the first time I've heard it sort of at the local level. But on logistics and supply chains, we have a lot of clients. We are quite active It's a significant part of our business, and it's growing. And I think it will continue to be the case post-COVID because of the changed nature of the way business will be. So EBRD is, I want to say, we are totally focused on doing deals. If you've got a deal that makes sense and it's more than 10 million total investment, bring it to us and we'll be happy to talk about it.
Okay,
And that goes for everyone out there.
We have 5 minutes left, and we have another question from Jakub Milatovic. I'm going to read it while Owen, maybe you can unmute Jakub. Bulgaria and Croatia entered the EU's exchange rate mechanism, thus paving the way for their euro adoption in 2023-24. How will the crisis impact Romania's plans for euro adoption?
It sounds like a Liviu question.
Yeah, it's a tough one. When I was minister, actually in 2014, I announced that Romania wants to join Euro by 2019. But it was actually the first month. June 2014 was the first month when Romania met all the Maastricht criteria. And since then, the criteria were met sustainably for about 3 years. But now we don't meet any criteria anymore. The first thing is to put order in our house. Let's say so. It's to make. Okay, there is a difficult fiscal situation coming on due to unforeseen circumstances. But aside from this, there are reforms that need to be implemented in order to bring the macro indicators in line, not because of the Maastricht criteria themselves, but because this is the right thing to do. So, and then, when the situation will be favorable, of course, when the opportunity will arise, the question is not if, because it's an obligation that Romania committed upon, it's when. So first we need to put order in our house.
Thank you. I think, Raluca, we got time for one more question. Do we have any more in the chat room?
No, that was the last question.
Okay. Then I will ask the last question.
Yeah, go ahead.
Let's look forward to 2021. And obviously it's very uncertain. What's going on with the pandemic is uncertain. What's going on with elections is uncertain. What's going on with the world economy is uncertain. But we live in a world of uncertainty, and you gentlemen think about this all the time. What are you thinking is the most likely scenario for the Romanian economy in 2021? Continuation of the slowdown that we have now, or get worse, get better? Why don't we start with Mark and just go across?
The problem is that I think the real question is what happens globally, and how long the status quo continues before this crisis. We're in the mid, as Liviu said, it's just starting. We don't know how it's all going to work out, and what's the global impact. So emerging markets are always affected by global contagion. There's plenty of liquidity. The bond markets are working, et cetera. But when the tide goes out, it's emerging markets that are a bit left high and dry, and that has a contagion effect on them. So Romania is exposed to that. And so to me, it's just a question of how the global situation evolves in 2021, and then how Romania responds to that. And I think the authorities are really quite capable, as we've seen. And it doesn't really matter, in a way, the politics is less important there, because there are experts that know how to do this. Liviu is a great example coming from the central bank. I was so impressed when we met and heard him the first time when I came. So that to me is an anchor that Romania has the capacity, on relative terms, to address the hardship that's coming, in my view, and we'll just have to see how it plays out.
Thank you. Marius?
In my view, it's highly dependent and correlated with a vaccine, and of course that's not just the case for Romania. It's the case for the global economy. But
Russia said they have one.
well, let's see how it works. But I think what will be critical is how quickly the government starts implementing some of the measures that they've announced. What do they do with privatizations? Because right now we are to have the IPO of Hydroelectrica. And hopefully the Bucharest airport later in 2021. We hope that given the where capital markets are, we don't see any reason for delaying these IPOs, because they will be critical in upgrading Romania to emerging market status. But from a GDP perspective, what we hope to see is a recovery. It won't be staggering growth, but hopefully we'll be in the black.
And last but not least, we started with you. Let's wrap it up. Liviu, what is your thoughts about 2021?
Well, it's someone wiser than me, Mrs. Georgieva, the managing director of the IMF. When she was asked the same question about the global economy, she said, prepare for the worst, hope for the best. I think that in 2020, we reacted with fiscal measures, with monetary measures for kind of universal measures. Probably in 2021, there will be a move from universal measures to more targeted measures for those really vulnerable, long-term vulnerable, while support policies will also focus on recovery, so it will be proactive, not only defensive. This being said, I can tell you because you mentioned my book about 100 years of Romanian economy. On average, in the last 100 years, a boom cycle lasted for 15 quarters. When this crisis hit, Romania was already in its 34th or 35 consecutive quarter of growth. So it shouldn't have come as a surprise, a recession on average lasts 7 quarters. But when the economy recovers from recession, I'm not saying that this is the case now, because this is a very unusual type of crisis. It was not driven by debt, it was not driven by current account, not even by banking system. So it may last just as long as a sanitary crisis lasts. But the experience of the previous crisis shows that when the economy recovers from this, it recovers. It's in a better shape it's going to be in a better shape than it was before. For example, 2013, which was the first year of full speed growth after the 2009-2010 crisis. All that growth was related to net exports. Nothing came from unsubstantiated domestic consumption. So the economy anyway repositioned itself quite fast during a crisis, and I'm confident that Romania has this capacity to reposition itself and to use this crisis as an opportunity.
That is an optimistic note to end on, which we appreciate and look forward to. I want to thank everybody for participating today, particularly our panelists, Liviu and Marius and Mark, for very helpful insights and information. This is one of a series of webinars that Alianta is sponsoring. Stay tuned. There'll be ones as the year goes on, some of them involving economics, some of them involving social activities, some of them involving surprises. So stay tuned. Thanks for everybody joining us today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Arrivederci.
Thank you.
Bye.